Good morning. Many thanks for our guests to be with us in this morning panel. Many thanks to our friends gathered today to listen to our discussion. I would start by thanking Professor Takahara and Professor Platias for being with us today to discuss a very topical and hot issue, I would say. And I regret that our colleagues that are announced for this panel could not make it because of the strike. It's a collateral damage of yesterday's strike, unfortunately. But I do hope that they will have another opportunity to speak during the forum. So we are meeting at, I would say, very interesting, fascinating, intriguing times. And allow me to start with a quote of Ian Bremmer, the director of Eurasia. In yesterday's Post, he wrote, "America just entered its post-globalization era. Globalization helped make the United States the most prosperous nation in history, but many Americans feel they haven't benefited from free trade and voted for Donald Trump to liberate them from the system the United States built over the past 80 years. He is delivering." So let's start discussing with the two distinguished professors we have with us today what this delivering means for the rest of the world. Because America is still the biggest superpower, but there is another superpower in Asia, China. There are other powers like Japan, Korea. There are many, let's say, challenges, not threats for the time being, for international security and for regional security. So, Professor Takahara, let's start with you. Please, let's have your views.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. I would like to thank not only the organizers of the forum, but also the Japanese Embassy and JTI for their great support in realizing my visit here. You know, I come from Japan, and therefore in this era of compounded crises, you know, not only geopolitical crises, but we are also facing climate change and what have you. For Japan, you know, Japan is dubbed as a country that is most advanced in meeting new challenges, like aging society, financial crisis, and all that kind of thing. And I think in facing the big geopolitical challenge of today, that is rising China, and how that is going to affect the maritime sea lines of communications and so on, I think we are much advanced in that sense. You know, the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, he already, in the year of 2017, May, gave an internal speech to naval officers expressing his ambition to become a true world power. He said, a true world power is one that is both a sea power and a land power. We are a land power, but we still are not a sea power. So our intention now is to develop become a true world power that is a sea power come land power. And that's what he's doing now. And we are feeling this physical pressure almost every day. And if something happens around Taiwan, for example, if Taiwan contingency happens, that is going to seriously disrupt the sea lines of communication. And it is going to damage very seriously the economies not only of Taiwan and China, but of Japan, of Korea. And that will affect us, everybody in the world. The tsunami of that effect is going to cover the global economy. And I think that's why many European countries are now sending their naval vessels over to our part of the world to signal to the Chinese that don't move, you know, don't use your fist to, if you wanted to change the regional order or the world order, you can do it according to the rules, but not by your fist. So that's one challenge that we are facing right now. And speaking of China, I think for the European audience, what interests you is the relationship between China and Russia. You know, The Chinese, in order to achieve this grand strategic target of becoming the champion of the world, they know that they need Russia in this endeavor. One high-ranking Chinese government official 2 years ago told us, after the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine, you know, in expressing the relationship between us, the Chinese, and the Russians, it is very easy for you Japanese to understand. If you think about the classic novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, this is about China in 3rd century when they had 3 kingdoms. They were vying each other to unite the whole country. And the biggest country was Wei. The smaller countries were Shu and Wu. So you Japanese love this novel. So you understand very well. Between Shu and Wu, the 2 smaller kingdoms, there are contradictions. But they need each other, you understand. That is our relations with Russia. So in order to confront the United States, in order to win the strategic competition with the United States, China needs to support Russia. So that's the situation that we are facing now.
Thank you, Professor, for this very holistic approach. And now I pass the floor to my good friend, Professor Platias, who is known for his surgical, let's say, approach to strategy issues. So we are living an era of strategic decisions, no?
Absolutely, of geopolitical competition. In order to help you decode what's going on, you have to keep in mind 2 words. The new Cold War, in order to explain what's going on between the United States and China, which will explain what's happening at sea. And the second key word is decoupling. The effort of the United States to decouple its economy from Chinese supply chains and the Chinese economy. Let me start with the new Cold War, the second Cold War. As my Japanese colleague said, China is rising. It aims to displace the United States from the top of the international system. Naturally, there is geopolitical competition. And as my Japanese colleague said, China, in order to become stronger in this competition, has used the traditional Mackinder strategy in order to control Eurasia, and to control Eurasia, it needs Russia. Therefore, this coalition between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, which create a big unit that the other Central Asian countries are gravitating. Therefore, we have in front of us a Eurasian land-based coalition that tries to challenge the thalassocratic, the oceanic powers of the West, which includes the United States, Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. That's the 2 blocs that are competing in a new Cold War. And now, coming to shipping, look where the competition takes place. Unlike the first Cold War that was taking place in Europe, now it takes place in the sea. And it takes place in the rimland where Eurasia meets the oceanic power. Baltic Sea, Black Sea, Aegean, Mediterranean, Red Sea, Persian Gulf, Indian and South China Sea, East-South China Sea, and the Arctic. You see, the center of gravity of the new Cold War and the dangerous areas for shipping are the sea lanes around Eurasia, and I outline some of them. 3 are already in war. Black Sea, Red Sea, and to some extent, the Persian Gulf. And the other seas, South China Sea, which is extremely important because 1/3 of the world trade takes place in South China Sea and 20% in the East Asian Sea, which means that if you control these lanes, which is China tries to do, it means that it controls world trade. Of course, the West will never agree with that. And also, it's very important for the reasons that you outlined to control Taiwan. Because if you see China, it's blocked to break into the Pacific. Because between Taiwan and Japan and Taiwan and Philippines, China has been blocked. So for China to control Taiwan, it's really the exit to the Pacific in order to compete with the United States at the control of the sea, the new thalassocracy that the Chinese are aiming. So that's the first way to explain what's going on. And this places ships at physical threats. Shipping now and supply chains has been weaponized. Ships are targets. Advanced technology is being used against ships. From targeting that they get through satellites to cruise missiles to unmanned vehicles. So shipping has been weaponized. Okay, my second way to explain what's going on is decoupling. The Americans made the mistake that they move all the, or most of the industrial capacity to China for economic reasons of efficiency. And this creates an asymmetrical advantage in favor of China, which is using it. Now the Americans understood that all these orders based on efficiency that they build works against them, and they want to change it. How you change that? Through a trade war, through sanctions, through tariffs, in order to create disincentives for buying for China, and in order to relocate supply chains. And the relocations that the Americans are planning have three different dimensions. One is onshoring. Try to move industrial capacity back in the United States. This will take a lot of time, but that's what Trump is trying to accomplish. And that's why he's using all these tariffs, and mostly against China.
Yeah.
The second thing that tries to do is, if we cannot get it in the United States, let's get it in a nearby country, like Mexico or Canada. That's, we call it nearshoring. And if you can do even that, at least go to your friends. Go to Japan, go to Korea, but most importantly, go to Vietnam, go to India, go to Thailand. So all this kind of global rebalancing in supply chains has a huge impact of shipping. And everything now is weaponized. Take sanctions, for example. The United States have imposed sanctions on Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, three of the most important energy-producing countries. This incredibly makes rebalancing. And this rebalancing, of course, brings side effects. If you cannot have normal trade, let's say, with China from Russia or with India, what you do, you build a shadow fleet. Then when you have a shadow fleet, then secondary sanctions come. So the whole shipping, it's in disarray because of this geopolitical and geoeconomic competition. That's what we are living right now.
Yes, certainly. This is the situation as you both describe it. But let's come back to the institutional framework that can rule this unruled world, because up to now, we had what we call the rules-based order. The rules-based order was, in principle, the American rules-based order. If the Americans withdraw, I mean, who is going to take the lead? We haven't seen, up to now at least, the Chinese wishing to build an alternative order, institutions. And the institutions they participate are not dominant in the international scene. So if the American policy continues, how would you see the international environment to be shaped? Along which institution or which alliances?
Shall I go on? You know, when Mr. Trump became first president in 2017, he immediately withdrew from TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Arrangement. And then there was a discussion in Japan, what are we going to do? Because it was a very important, I mean, America was a very important element in the TPP arrangement. But then the Japanese government decided to go ahead with TPP. We need this step towards a free trade area, and that's what we did. And I think that's the kind of initiative that we need now. You're quite right. We do need institutions. We do need to maintain our rules-based order in one way or another. So now I think we need to discuss what to do with China's attempt to be admitted into the TPP. We need a discussion there.
Professor Platias?
Well, coming to order. How you establish order? One way is through hegemonic stability. You have a hegemon, he creates the rule of the game and puts order. Now, this hegemon, which created the system, thinks that the cost of maintaining the system is too high. And also this hegemon, talking about the Americans, are thinking that the orders that they have created through globalization, having the US fleet keeping the ocean open, it works in favor of China. Therefore, naturally, it's actually very naturally what they try to do. They try to change an order that works in favor of their opponents. Now, if this order based on hegemonic stability, and when you say institutions that serve this hegemonic stability, is because we have to be frank. I mean, the institutions from UN to World Bank to IMF, they were serving the hegemon. Now, let's see alternative orders. In the other extreme is anarchy, a Hobbesian world. Everybody against everybody. And the possibility of a competitive system to have stability is through balance of power. That's how international politics worked all these years. So the system tries to find a new equilibrium in the balance of power. Now, in the balance of power system, it helps to have some rules. For example, have areas of influence. And I think that's what the Americans are trying to negotiate with, at least with the Russians. Spheres of influence that a dominant power coordinates. So we will have competition, but at the same time, the great powers will have their sphere of influence. For example, we already have a Chinese sphere of influence in Central Asia through the Silk Road and all these infrastructural projects that they are building and in cooperation with Russia. Now Trump, the way that tries to deal with the Ukrainian problem is essentially giving Russia a sphere of influence around it. The Europeans, they don't like that, but you know, this is geopolitically what we are discussing right now. So I see the world is getting into the world-based order, forget it. Now we are moving either to a Hobbesian anarchic world, which is very dangerous, because everybody will be against everybody, or in a more orderly world, which has to be the spheres of influence.
Please.
I think that kind of multipolarity is something that we do not want. You know, when the Chinese say, Mr. Wang Yi, the foreign minister, has been repeating this phrase, that is, China is for the promotion of an equal and orderly multipolarization. So what kind of equality is that? What he has in mind, or what China has been implementing, would tell us that it's equality between the poles. And as Professor just mentioned, each pole would have its sphere of influence. Yeah. And inside the sphere of influence, there's no equality. It's a kind of a hierarchical order. Do we want that kind of a world? I don't really think so. So I think when the developing world in particular is listening very carefully what the Chinese are saying, they haven't quite understood what the Chinese really mean when they want multipolarization. So we should explain it clearly to our friends in the so-called global south, that do you really want that kind of a world?
But if you allow me
Yes.
a small comment, I don't like this discussion about multipolarity. Everybody talks about multipolarity. But if you look at the international system, there are two colossus. The United States controlling 26% of the world GDP, and the Chinese controlling about 17 to 18, and in PPP terms, they actually have managed to overcome the United States. Who is the third one? Japan? It's only 4% of the world GDP. Germany? 4% of the world GDP. India? 4% of the world GDP. The third, who is the third power? Multipolarity means to have at least 3 powers. There's no third one. So that's why I try to explain the world through a new Cold War with 2 hegemons having a sphere of influence, which we call it alliance, and they are competing. If you don't try to interpret the world this way, which I offer an explanation, you cannot make sense of it, because the world is not multipolar, and only when you understand that the 2 big superpowers are fighting with their allies, you can make sense of what's going on. And I completely agree with you. When I described an order, does not mean that I like it, okay? Of course, as coming from a small state, I like a world having institutions, international law. But this is not the case. It's not what we want, what is happening. So what we see, it's not favorable for the ones that are not the superpowers, that the ones that they are subjected in this kind of order. And for us, particularly Greeks, that we live in this area, that we have a rising hegemon, which is Turkey, that wants to resurrect the Ottoman Empire. Of course, this is a problem. But this is how the world is getting. And therefore, for smaller actions like Japan vis-à-vis China, Greece vis-à-vis Turkey, we have to find ways of balancing and creating alliance, and some alliance have been the Oceanic Alliance, which we have, in order to be able to survive in this dangerous world.
Professor Takahara, following up on what Professor Platias just said, there is a similarity between, if I may, Japanese security and Greek security, in the sense that both countries rely for the security on US. We don't have signs that this US-Greece or US-Japan strategic relationship would going to decrease, let's say. But of course, if US has no interest in pursuing, let's say, an active security and defense policy, there will be a problem. How from your...
So yes, there is concern that perhaps the Trump administration is losing interest in supporting the alliances and so on. But at the moment, we are getting mixed signals from the new Trump administration. You know, Defense Secretary Hegseth made a visit to the Philippines and Japan. And what he said in Japan, for example, was perfect for us. He said that the United States is going to be ready to protect Taiwan, and their presence will be maintained. So that's one kind of message that we're getting. But we don't know what Mr. Trump is thinking in his mind. Yeah. So the worry continues. That's true. So we should be prepared for drastic change. But at the same time, there are positive messages coming over too. So very confusing at the moment.
Thank you. One moment to conclude.
Okay. What I find very disturbing is that the United States was taking care of the freedom of the ships with its fleet. Now this is under a question mark. If you read carefully the discussions that the top American decisions had in via signal when they were dealing with the Houthis, the question was, why should we keep the Red Sea open when the Europeans are profiting more than we do? This is a question that completely destabilizes the freedom of the sea, because you need a hegemon to be able to impose the freedom of the sea, which it's essentially destabilizes shipping and the freedom of the sea and international trade. Therefore, we are entering into an era until the United States decides what it wants to do with such central issues like freedom of the seas. We will have a lot of uncertainty, as my Japanese colleague said.
Thank you both for this semi-optimistic, semi-pessimistic approach. I do hope that we will have the opportunity to exchange views also at when things get more clear. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.